A young American woman recounts the traumatic childhood she endured when her manipulative parents repeatedly forced her to lie to teachers, neighbors, and authorities to cover up their illegal activities and personal failures. What started as small white lies escalated into major deceptions that put her education, friendships, and mental health at risk. When the truth finally surfaced, instead of taking responsibility, her parents blamed and severely punished her for the very lies they had demanded she tell. This is her story of survival, finding her voice, and breaking free from a toxic family cycle. The smell of burnt toast filled our cramped kitchen in suburban Phoenix as my mother rehearsed the lie with me for the third time that morning. I was 8 years old, standing in my worn-out sneakers on the cold linoleum floor, my backpack heavy with homework I hadn't been able to complete. "Remember, Emma," Mom said, gripping my shoulders tight enough to leave marks. "If Mrs. Henderson asks why you missed school yesterday, what do you say?" "That I was sick with the flu," I whispered, staring at the crack in the kitchen wall that looked like a lightning bolt. "And if she asks to see a doctor's note?" "I'd tell her you forgot to. Bring it, but you'll send it tomorrow." My mother's eyes were bloodshot, and I could smell the sour scent of cheap wine on her breath even though it was only 7 in the morning. The truth was, I hadn't been sick at all. Mom had dragged me along to some sketchy apartment downtown, where she'd spent the entire day in heated arguments with men in expensive suits, papers scattered everywhere, while I sat in a corner trying to make myself invisible. "That's my smart girl," she said, finally releasing my shoulders. "And Emma, this stays between us. Family business is family business." Dad emerged from the bedroom, his uniform wrinkled and his badge crooked. He worked as a security guard at the mall. But lately, he'd been coming home with way more cash than his paycheck should allow. The living room coffee table was littered with envelopes stuffed with money, lottery tickets, and documents I wasn't supposed to look at. "She ready?" Dad asked, not looking at me. "She knows what to say," Mom replied, smoothing down my hair roughly. "Don't you, Emma?" I nodded, my stomach churning. This wasn't the first time they'd made me lie, but it was the first time it felt this heavy, this wrong. The lies were getting bigger, more complicated. Last month it was telling the landlord that my parents weren't home when they were hiding in the back bedroom. Before that, it was lying to Child Protective Services when they showed up asking questions about why I'd been absent from school so much. The school bus rumbled outside our duplex, and I could hear kids laughing and shouting. Normal kids with normal parents who didn't make them accomplices in whatever mess they'd created. "Go on," Dad said, opening the front door. "And remember, if anyone asks too many questions—" "I don't know anything," I finished automatically. As I walked toward the bus, I could feel my parents watching from the window. Mrs. Henderson was my favorite teacher. She actually listened when I talked, helped me with math when I struggled, and always had a kind word when I looked sad. The thought of lying to her face made my chest feel tight. I climbed onto the bus and took my usual seat near the back, away from the other kids who had stopped trying to be my friend months ago. It's hard to maintain friendships when you can never invite anyone over, when you're constantly making excuses, when you're always one emergency lie away from your whole world falling apart. The Phoenix desert stretched out through the bus windows, all cacti and brown earth under the blazing sun. I pressed my forehead against the warm glass and wondered what would happen if I just told the truth for once. What if I walked into Mrs. Henderson's classroom and said, "My parents are making me lie, and I don't know what they're really doing, but I know it's wrong." But even at 8 years old, I knew that wasn't an option. The fear they'd instilled in me ran too deep. "Family loyalty above all else," Dad always said. "We protect each other no matter what." The bus pulled into Roosevelt Elementary, and my stomach dropped as I saw Mrs. Henderson standing at the classroom door, greeting students with her warm smile. She'd definitely noticed I'd been absent yesterday. She noticed everything. "Good morning." "Emma?" she said as I approached. Are you feeling better, sweetie? Your mom called and said you had the flu. Here it was. The moment of truth. Or rather, the moment of lie. Yes, ma'am, I managed, avoiding her concerned eyes. Much better now. But Mrs. Henderson knew me too well. She crouched down to my level, her voice gentle. Emma, honey, is everything okay at home? You seem worried about something. My heart pounded so hard I was sure she could hear it. This was my chance. This was my moment to tell someone, anyone, about the fear that lived in my chest every single day. Instead, I heard my mother's voice in my head. Family business is family business. Everything's fine, Mrs. Henderson, I lied, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Just tired from being sick. She studied my face for another moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, sweetheart, but you know you can talk to me about anything. Right? Anything at all. I nodded and hurried to my desk, my cheeks burning with shame. As I sat down and pulled out my incomplete homework, I wondered how many more lies I'd have to tell before someone finally saw through them. What I didn't know was that Mrs. Henderson was already suspicious, and what happened next would change everything. Have you ever been forced to lie to protect someone you love, even when you knew it was wrong? What would you have done in my place? But the web of lies my parents had woven was about to get much more complicated, and soon I'd discover just how far they'd go to keep their secrets hidden. 3 weeks after my first major lie to Mrs. Henderson, I was sitting in the principal's office with sweaty palms and a racing heart. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Principal Martinez's desk, where a thick manila folder sat with my name written across it in black ink. My name is Emma Richardson, and by the time I was 9 years old, I had become an expert at deception, trained by the two people who were supposed to teach me right from wrong. Emma, Principal Martinez said, adjusting his glasses, we need to talk about your attendance. You've missed 18 days of school this semester, and it's only October. I squirmed in the uncomfortable plastic chair, my mind racing through the script my parents had drilled into me the night before. They'd sat me down at our kitchen table, surrounded by those mysterious envelopes and documents, coaching me like I was preparing for the performance of my life. I've been sick a lot, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Really bad migraines. My mom says it might be genetic. Mrs. Henderson, who was also in the room, leaned forward. Emma, honey, we're worried about you. When you are here, you seem tired, distracted. Your grades have dropped significantly. The truth was, I was exhausted. My parents' late-night business meetings had become almost nightly affairs. Strange men with thick accents would come to our house, sometimes staying until 3 or 4 in the morning. They'd argue in hushed tones about money, about moving product, about keeping things quiet. I'd lie in my bed, listening through the thin walls, trying to piece together what they were really doing. The doctor says I need more rest, I continued, sticking to the story. That's why I've been absent. Principal Martinez opened the folder, revealing a stack of papers. We've requested medical documentation multiple times, Emma. Your parents keep promising to provide doctor's notes, but they never materialize. My stomach clenched. This was the part my parents hadn't prepared me for. They'd told me the school would just accept my word, that adults didn't really pay that much attention to kids like me. My mom, she keeps forgetting, I stammered. She's been really busy with work stuff. Mrs. Henderson and Principal Martinez exchanged glances. I was learning to read those looks, the silent communication between adults who suspect something isn't right. Emma, Mrs. Henderson said gently, we called the doctor's office your mom listed on your emergency contact form. They have no record of treating you for migraines or any other condition in the past year. The room felt like it was spinning. My parents had told me to give the school Dr. Peterson's name, but apparently they'd never actually taken me there. The lie was falling apart, and I was trapped in the middle of it. Maybe it was a different doctor? I tried desperately. We've been to a few different ones. Principal Martinez leaned back in his chair, his expression serious but not unkind. Emma, we're not trying to get you in trouble. We're concerned about your welfare. If there are problems at home, we want to help. That's when I made my biggest mistake. The pressure, the guilt, the constant fear of disappointing my parents, it all came crashing down at once. There are no problems, I burst out, louder than I'd intended. My parents take good care of me. They're just busy with important work, stuff, and sometimes I get sick, and that's not their fault. The vehemence of my defense only seemed to make them more suspicious. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows raised slightly, and Principal Martinez made a note in his folder. What kind of work do your parents do, Emma? He asked casually. Another question I wasn't prepared for. My dad officially worked security at the mall, but that didn't explain the constant stream of visitors, the envelopes of cash, or why we'd moved 3 times in the past 2 years. My dad works security, I said carefully. And my mom? She helps people with paperwork stuff. It was the vaguest answer I could give, but it was all I really knew. My parents were careful to keep their real business away from me, even as they used me as their primary alibi. I see, Principal Martinez said, writing something else down. Well, Emma, we're going to need to have another conversation with your parents. This time, in person. My blood ran cold. My parents had always handled school communication over the phone, making excuses about work schedules and transportation. Issues. They'd never actually set foot in Roosevelt Elementary. They're really busy, I said quickly. Maybe they could call you instead? No, Principal Martinez said firmly. This needs to be a face-to-face meeting. We have some serious concerns about your education and well-being. As I walked back to Mrs. Henderson's classroom, my mind was already racing ahead to what would happen when I got home. My parents would be furious that the lie hadn't held up. They'd blame me for not being convincing enough, for not sticking to the story perfectly. That afternoon, I sat at my desk pretending to work on math problems while my heart hammered in my chest. Through the classroom windows, I could see other kids playing on the playground during recess, laughing and running around without a care in the world. I envied them more than they could ever know. When the final bell rang, I walked out to the pickup area where my mom was waiting in our beat-up Honda Civic. Her face was already tight with anxiety. How did it go? She asked before I'd even gotten my seatbelt on. They want to meet with you and Dad, I said quietly. In person. They don't believe the doctor's story. The silence that followed was deafening. My mom's knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, and I could see the muscle in her jaw twitching the way it did when she was really angry. You must have said something wrong, she finally said. You must have given them a reason to doubt you. I said exactly what you told me to say, I protested weakly. Obviously not, or we wouldn't be in this situation. As we drove through the Phoenix suburbs, past strip malls and desert landscaping, I stared out the window and wondered what normal families talked about in the car. Did other kids have to worry about whether their parents would be arrested? Did other 9-year-olds lie awake at night wondering if their family was about to fall apart? When we got home, my dad was waiting in the living room, surrounded by his usual collection of mysterious paperwork. The moment we walked in, I could tell from his expression that Mom had already texted him about the school meeting. Upstairs, he said to me without preamble. We need to talk. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I heard my parents begin one of their hushed, urgent conversations. Words like exposure, risk, and damage control drifted up to where I sat on my bed, hugging my knees to my chest. What would you do if you were trapped between protecting your parents and telling the truth to people who were trying to help? You? But I was about to learn that my parents' idea of damage control would push me to a breaking point I never saw coming. The mandatory parent-teacher conference was scheduled for Friday at 3 p.m., and by Thursday night, our house felt like a war room. My parents had spent the entire week coaching me on a new, more elaborate story, complete with fake medical records they'd somehow obtained, and a whole backstory about my supposed chronic illness. I'm Emma, and I was 9 years old when I realized my parents weren't just asking me to tell little white lies anymore. They were turning me into a full accomplice in whatever illegal operation they were running. "Remember," my mother said, pacing back and forth in our living room while I sat, cross-legged on the worn carpet. "You've been seeing Dr. Williams in Scottsdale for your migraines. You go every other week. The medication makes you drowsy, which is why your grades have suffered." My father stood by the window, periodically peeking through the blinds like he expected police cars to pull up at any moment. The coffee table was covered with documents I'd never seen before, official-looking papers with medical letterheads, prescription bottles with my name on them that I'd never actually taken, even a fake patient bracelet. What if they ask me specific questions about the medicine? I asked, my voice small and scared. You tell them it's called, what was it, honey? Dad looked at Mom. Topiramate, she said, reading from a piece of paper. 25 milligrams, twice daily. It makes you sleepy and sometimes gives you stomach aches. I stared at the prescription bottle with my name on it, filled with pills I'd never seen before. Where did you get all this stuff? My parents exchanged one of their looks, the kind that meant I'd asked a question I shouldn't have. Don't worry about that, Dad said sharply. Just focus on your part. This is important, Emma. If you mess this up, if you don't stick to the story exactly... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Over the past few months, I'd learned that disappointing my parents came with consequences. No dinner, being locked in my room for hours, sometimes having my few toys taken away as punishment for lying, which was ironic considering what they were asking me to do. That night, I barely slept. I kept rehearsing the medical lie over and over, trying to memorize details about appointments I'd never had and symptoms I'd never experienced. Through my bedroom wall, I could hear my parents having another one of their urgent, whispered conversations with people who came to our house after midnight. Friday morning came too soon. I got dressed in my best school clothes, a blue dress my mom had bought specifically for the meeting, and tried to eat the bowl of cereal she put in front of me, but my stomach was in knots. You look pale, Mom observed, applying her lipstick in the hallway mirror. That's actually perfect. Sick kids look pale. At school, the day dragged on forever. I couldn't concentrate on anything Mrs. Henderson was teaching. During math class, she caught me staring out the window and came over to my desk. Emma, sweetie, are you feeling all right? She asked, her voice full of genuine concern. Just tired from my medicine, I said automatically, and immediately felt sick about how easily the lie came out. She frowned slightly. What medicine is that? Honey? Panic shot through me. This wasn't part of the script. For my migraines. It makes me sleepy. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly, but I could see in her eyes that she was filing away this information, adding it to whatever growing list of concerns she had about me. At 3 p.m. sharp, my parents walked into Principal Martinez's office like they owned the place. My father had cleaned up nicely, his security guard uniform replaced with khaki pants and a polo shirt. My mother wore her respectable suburban mom outfit, complete with a cardigan and pearls she'd bought at a thrift store specifically for occasions like this. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, Principal Martinez said, shaking their hands. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. The next hour was like watching a masterclass in deception. My parents smoothly presented their fake medical documentation, spinning a story about my chronic migraines with the confidence of seasoned actors. My mother even managed to produce a few tears when talking about how difficult it's been watching Emma suffer. Dr. Williams has been wonderful, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. But as you can see from his notes, This is an ongoing condition that will require careful management. Mrs. Henderson studied the papers carefully, asking detailed questions about my treatment plan and medication schedule. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, marveling at how prepared my parents were. They had answers for everything. But then Principal Martinez asked a question that made my blood run cold. These medical records show regular appointments with Dr. Williams, he said. But our attendance records show that Emma has been absent on days when she didn't have appointments scheduled. Can you explain that discrepancy? The room fell silent. I watched my father's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, and my mother's smile became just a fraction more forced. Well, Mom said carefully, the migraines don't always coincide with appointment days. Sometimes Emma wakes up feeling terrible, and we have to make the judgment call to keep her home. Of course, Mrs. Henderson said diplomatically, but we're also concerned about Emma's academic performance on the days she is here. Her attention seems scattered, and she often appears anxious or distressed. That's when my father made his mistake. Instead of expressing parental concern, his voice took on a defensive edge. Are you suggesting we're not taking proper care of our daughter? He asked, his tone just sharp enough to reveal a flash of the anger that lived just beneath his carefully constructed facade. Principal Martinez raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. Not at all, Mr. Richardson. We're simply trying to understand how we can better support Emma's educational needs. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with my parents smoothly deflecting every concern and providing plausible explanations for every red flag. As we finally prepared to leave, I thought we'd actually pulled it off. Then Mrs. Henderson said something that changed everything. Emma, she said kindly, before you go, can you tell me the name of your medicine again? The one for your migraines? It was such a simple question. I'd practiced the answer dozens of times. But in that moment, with everyone staring at me, with the pressure of maintaining this enormous lie crushing down on my 9-year-old shoulders, my mind went completely blank. I stammered, looking desperately at my parents for help. My mother's eyes were burning into me, her smile frozen in place. My father's hand tightened on the back of his chair. Take your time, sweetie, Mrs. Henderson said gently. Topiramate, I finally whispered, but it was too late. The damage was done. Everyone in the room had seen me panic, had seen me look to my parents for the answer to a question about my own medication. The drive home was silent, but I could feel the fury radiating from both my parents like heat from a furnace. When we got to the house, my father sent me straight to my room while they had what sounded like a very heated discussion downstairs. An hour later, my mother came upstairs. Her mask of suburban respectability was completely gone, replaced by a cold anger I'd never seen before. You almost ruined everything, she said, her voice eerily calm. One simple question, Emma. One answer you've practiced 100 times, and you nearly destroyed our entire family. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I got scared. Sorry isn't good enough, she replied. We trusted you with something important, and you let us down. Actions have consequences. She turned and walked toward my bedroom door, then paused. You'll stay in here until you can prove you understand how serious this is, she said. No dinner tonight. No breakfast tomorrow. Maybe hunger will help you remember your priorities. The door closed, and I heard the sound I'd been dreading, the click of the lock being turned from the outside. As I sat alone in my room, my stomach already beginning to growl, I finally understood the truth. My parents weren't protecting our family. They were protecting themselves, and I was just a tool they used to do it. Have you ever been punished for something you were forced to do? How do you find the courage to stand up for yourself when the people who are supposed to love you are the ones hurting you? But my punishment was just the beginning. What my parents did next would push me to a breaking point that would change the course of my entire life. I spent 3 days locked in my room with nothing but water and crackers slipped under the door twice a day. By Monday morning, I was weak, dizzy, and something inside me had fundamentally changed. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was angry. My name is Emma Richardson, and I was 9 years old when I finally realized that protecting my parents was slowly destroying me. When Mom finally unlocked my door Monday morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She made me breakfast, helped me get dressed for school, and even braided my hair, all while maintaining the cheerful facade she'd perfected over the years. "Remember, sweetheart," she said, tying the ribbon in my hair. "What happens in our family stays in our family. Mrs. Henderson might ask you questions, but you just stick to our story, okay?" I nodded, but something was different. The fear that had controlled me for so long was still there, but it was mixed with something new, a quiet, burning determination. At school, I moved through my morning classes like a robot, barely speaking, barely participating. During lunch, I sat alone at my usual table, picking at a sandwich I had no appetite for. That's when Mrs. Henderson approached me. "Emma," she said softly, sitting down across from me, "can we talk?" I looked up at her kind face, and for the first time in months, I didn't immediately start planning a lie. "I want to tell you something," she continued, "and I need you to really listen to me. Whatever is happening at home, whatever you might be afraid of, you are not alone. There are people who want to help you, but we can't help if we don't know what's really going on." My throat felt tight, and my hands were shaking slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "Emma, honey, I've been teaching for 15 years. I know what fear looks like on a child's face. I know what it sounds like when someone is repeating words that aren't their own." She leaned forward slightly. "The medicine you mentioned on Friday, topiramate, I looked it up. It's a real migraine medication, but it's almost never prescribed to children your age. And the way you hesitated when I asked you about it." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I fought them back. "My parents aren't doing anything wrong," I whispered, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. "I'm not saying they are," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "but I am saying that you seem to be carrying a burden that's too heavy for a 9-year-old to carry alone." That afternoon, instead of going straight home like I always did, I found myself walking the long way, taking the scenic route through the neighborhood park. I needed time to think, time to process what Mrs. Henderson had said. The park was mostly empty except for a few joggers and a woman pushing her toddler on the swings. I sat on a bench under a mesquite tree, watching normal families enjoy a normal afternoon, and tried to imagine what that must feel like. What would it be like to go home without worrying about what lie I'd have to tell next? What would it be like to have parents who protected me instead of using me? What would it be like to just be a kid? My phone buzzed, a text from my mom asking where I was. I was already 20 minutes later than usual, and I knew she'd be worried that I'd said something to someone at school. When I finally got home, both my parents were waiting in the living room. The coffee table was clear for once, no mysterious documents or envelopes in sight. "Where were you?" Dad asked, his voice deceptively casual. "Just walking slow," I said. "I had a headache." Mom said, studying my face. "Mrs. Henderson didn't keep you after class or anything?" "No," I lied. But even as I said it, I wondered why I was still protecting them. Why was I still playing their game? That night, as I lay in bed listening to another one of their late-night business meetings, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep being their accomplice, their shield, their scapegoat. I was 9 years old, but I was smart enough to know that what they were doing was wrong, and making me lie about it was wrong too. The next morning, I walked into Mrs. Henderson's classroom early, before the other kids arrived. She was at her desk, grading papers and sipping coffee from her favorite mug, the one with sunflowers on it that her daughter had given her. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something." She looked up immediately, setting down her pen and giving me her full attention. "Of course, Emma. What is it?" I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown territory. "I don't have migraines," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've never been to Dr. Williams. My parents made me lie about being sick because they don't want you to know why I'm really absent from school so much." Mrs. Henderson's expression didn't change, but I could see the gentle concern in her eyes. "Okay," she said calmly. "Can you tell me why you're really absent?" And then it all came pouring out. The late-night meetings with strangers, the envelopes full of cash, the constant moving, the way my parents coached me to lie to teachers and principals and anyone else who asked questions. I told her about being locked in my room as punishment for not lying convincingly enough, about the fake medical records they'd somehow obtained, about the fear that lived in my chest every single day. Mrs. Henderson listened to everything without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. When I finally finished, I felt simultaneously exhausted and relieved, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. "Emma," she said gently, "I'm so proud of you for telling me this. It must have been incredibly scary to carry all of that alone. Are you going to call my parents?" I asked, the old fear creeping back in. "I'm going to make sure you're safe," she said. "That's my job. And more importantly, that's what you deserve." Within an hour, Principal Martinez had called Child Protective Services, and by lunchtime, a social worker named Ms. Garcia was sitting in the school counselor's office, asking me gentle questions about my home life. For the first time in months, I answered with complete honesty. When my parents were called to the school for an emergency meeting that afternoon, they walked in expecting to handle another round of concerns about my attendance. Instead, they found themselves facing a room full of professionals who now knew the truth about their lies and manipulation. I watched from the counselor's office as my father's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. He went from charming and apologetic to angry and defensive in a matter of minutes, while my mother sat in stunned silence, probably calculating how much trouble they were really in. "You don't understand," I heard my dad saying through the closed door. "Emma has problems. She makes things up. She's always been a difficult child." But it was too late. The school had documentation of their fake medical records, evidence of their deception, and most importantly, they had my testimony. The truth from the child they'd tried so hard to silence. That night, I stayed with Ms. Garcia's family while investigators searched our house. 2 days later, my parents were arrested on charges of fraud, child endangerment, and running an illegal gambling operation out of our home. I spent the next several months in foster care, and for the first time in years, I experienced what it felt like to live without fear. My foster family, the Johnsons, treated me like a normal kid. I didn't have to lie for them, didn't have to carry their secrets, didn't have to earn my right to food and shelter by being their accomplice. 6 months later, I was adopted by my Aunt Sarah, my father's sister, who had been trying to get custody of me for years, but had been blocked by my parents' lies about her being unstable and unfit. Now, 15 years later, I'm a social worker myself, specializing in helping children who are trapped in situations similar to what I experienced. I've learned that family loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of your own well-being, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's destructive behavior. My parents served 3 years in federal prison for their crimes. They've both tried to contact me since their release, claiming they were just trying to provide for the family and that I was too young to understand their situation. But I understand perfectly now. They didn't make me lie to protect our family. They made me lie to protect themselves from the consequences of their choices. There's a big difference to any child who might be listening to this and recognizing their own situation. You are not responsible for protecting the adults in your life from the consequences of their actions. You deserve to feel safe, to tell the truth, to be loved without conditions or strings attached. Finding my voice at 9 years old saved my life. It can save yours too. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting yourself? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's terrifying. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And you matter more than any lie they've convinced you to tell.